We live in a culture that is absolutely obsessed with receipts.
Oh,
You
comedic.
can't just tell a story anymore. People want the screenshots, the timestamps. It's pics or it didn't happen. We were a skeptical bunch.
Which is healthy, honestly. I mean, blind trust is rarely a good strategy.
True. But nowhere is that tension between skepticism and belief more intense than when we talk about the Bible. For a long, long time, the vibe in the academic world was that if it was in the Bible but not in a museum, it was. Well, it was treated as folklore.
That was the default setting, absolutely. For generations of historians and archaeologists, the burden of proof was just incredibly high. The assumption was these are religious myths, nice stories, maybe like King Arthur, but certainly not a historical record.
But that is exactly what we are unpacking today, because the ground, and I mean that literally, the ground has shifted. We're looking at a massive stack of evidence, rocks, scrolls, medical data, geopolitical shifts, that doesn't just suggest the skeptics were wrong.
It proves the text is reliable. It's a move from stories to history. And just to be clear, we aren't talking about spiritual feelings here.
No.
We are auditing the Bible as a historical document. We're looking at the hard evidence that validates the text with absolute confidence.
So let's start with the hard stuff then, the stones. Because for a long time, the biggest criticism was that some of the major players in the Bible were, well, total fiction. And the biggest target was King David.
He is the central figure of the Old Testament monarchy, right?
Yeah.
You have the Psalms, the battles, the whole lineage. But for decades, there was this dominant school of thought called biblical minimalism.
Minimalism.
Basically the view that the Bible's history is minimal. These scholars argued David was a myth. They claimed there was absolutely zero extra-biblical evidence that he or his kingdom ever existed.
Wow.
They said the kingdom of David was a literary invention created centuries later to give Israel this glorious backstory.
Which is a huge claim. I mean, if David didn't exist, the whole narrative structure just collapses.
Exactly. And that was the academic consensus. Until 1993.
Okay, what happened?
Everything changed at a site called Tel Dan in northern Israel. Archaeologists were digging and they found this broken piece of black basalt, a stele.
Okay, pause. I've seen that word before, but what exactly is a stele?
Think of it like an ancient billboard or a victory monument. When a king won a battle, he put up a stone slab inscribed with something like, I, King so-and-so, crushed my enemies and I am the greatest.
Classic ancient bragging rights.
Precisely. And this specific stele was written by an enemy of Israel. He's boasting about killing kings of Israel and Judah. But the key's in the text. He explicitly brags about defeating the House of David.
It's the House of David.
That phrase. It crushed the minimalist theory overnight. You don't brag about defeating the dynasty of a mythical character. You don't go to war against a ghost.
So it's proof.
It proved that not only was David real, but he established a royal line that was recognized by his enemies.
It's wild how one rock can silence 100 years of debate.
It happens repeatedly. Look at the New Testament. For a long time, people questioned Pontius Pilate.
The man who sentenced Jesus to death. I thought he was pretty well established.
Well, we had the Gospels and later historians writing about him, sure, but we had no physical evidence from his actual time in office. Critics argued he might have been a literary device.
So a character, not a governor.
That was the argument, until 1961. Archaeologists are working at Caesarea Maritima, and they find a limestone block being used as a step in a theater.
Wait, people were walking on it.
For centuries, but when they flipped it over, there was an inscription. It clearly read, Pontius Pilatus, prefect of Judea, the first physical proof. His existence, his correct title, his location. It matched the biblical account perfectly.
I love that. They were literally wiping their feet on the evidence. But speaking of images, rocks give us names, but do we have faces?
We do. And this one comes from the Assyrians, who were the brutal superpower of the day. There's an artifact in the British Museum called the Black Obelisk of Shalmaneser III.
Sounds ominous.
It is. It's a 7-foot-tall black limestone pillar. And it depicts people bringing tribute to the Assyrian king. And in one panel, you see a figure on his hands and knees, face pressed into the dirt. We know who that is. The inscription identifies him as Jehu, son of Omri, King Jehu of Israel. It's the earliest known image of an Israelite king, and it confirms the accounts in 2 Kings. We are literally looking at the face of a man from the Bible.
That grounds it in a way that text just doesn't. But speaking of Assyrians, let's talk about the siege of Lachish. This feels like a detective story where the clue is what's missing.
The Lachish reliefs are incredible. Massive wall carvings from King Sennacherib's palace. They show in graphic detail the siege of the Judean city of Lachish. It matches the account in 2 Kings and Isaiah perfectly.
Right, but the Bible says Sennacherib didn't just want Lachish, he wanted Jerusalem. He surrounded it, but the text says he failed, that God intervened, the Assyrian army was decimated overnight, and he went home without firing an arrow.
And that is where the Assyrian record gets very interesting. We found Sennacherib's own annals. He brags, "I shut up Hezekiah the Judean like a bird in a cage." He drags about taking Lachish. He brags about all the tribute he received.
But
But he never claims he conquered Jerusalem. For an Assyrian king who would boast about stubbing his toe if he could spin it as a victory, that silence is everything.
the silence is the proof.
His omission confirms the biblical account. He failed to take the city.
The stones speak even when they keep their mouth shut. That is powerful.
It creates a consistent pattern. The stones, the inscriptions, they all anchor the narrative in real history.
Okay, so the history holds up, but there's another angle of attack that I hear all the time, the telephone game argument.
Right, the idea that it's all been changed over time.
Exactly. The idea is, sure, maybe it was written down, but it's been copied by hand for thousands of years. How do we know the Bible we have today is the same one they wrote back then?
That was a valid question for a long time. Until 1947, that's when we get the Dead Sea Scrolls.
The shepherd boy throwing a rock into a cave, right?
Exactly. A Bedouin shepherd hears a jar break. And inside those caves, they found over 900 manuscripts.
So for context, before this, what was the oldest copy we had?
Before the scrolls, our oldest complete Hebrew manuscripts were the Masoretic texts, which dated to about 900 or 1000 AD.
That's a huge gap from when the Old Testament was written.
A 1,000-year gap, and that gap fueled the skepticism. But the Dead Sea Scrolls, they dated back to 250 BC to 68 AD. We suddenly jump back in time by a full millennium.
So, the moment of truth, did they match?
The verdict was stunning. The Great Isaiah Scroll, found in the caves, dates to about 125 BC. When scholars compared it to the text we had from 1,000 years later, they were virtually identical.
Identical.
The differences were minor spelling variations. Things like the Hebrew equivalent of color versus color. No change in meaning. It proved that the Jewish scribes were incredibly meticulous. The text hadn't evolved. It had been preserved.
That just completely dismantles the telephone game theory.
It wasn't a game. It was a disciplined transmission. And we can go back even further. In 1979, archaeologists found the silver scrolls in a tomb. Tiny silver amulets. They unrolled them and found the priestly blessing from number 6.
The Lord bless thee and keep thee, the blessing they still use today.
The very same. And these scrolls date to the 7th century BC. That is 400 years older than the Dead Sea Scrolls. It shows the scripture was written, standardized, and in use centuries before many scholars claimed.
It's incredible. The deeper you dig, the older the evidence gets, and the more it looks exactly like what we have today.
Precisely.
Okay, let's pivot. We've done history, let's do science. Because usually people think Bible versus science is a cage match. You have to pick one. But some things in the text seem strangely ahead of their time.
Well, the Bible isn't a science textbook, but when it touches on physical reality, it's remarkably accurate, often in ways the human writers couldn't possibly have understood.
Like the law of circumcision. Genesis commands Abraham to circumcise baby boys, specifically on the 8th day, not the 7th, not the 9th, the 8th. Why?
For thousands of years, that was just a religious ritual. But modern medical science tells us something fascinating about blood clotting. 2 key elements, vitamin K and prothrombin. They're essential for clotting. In a newborn, vitamin K is low, but it spikes, specifically on the 8th day of life, to a level higher than it will ever be again, about 110% of normal.
So the 8th day is literally the safest day in a human life to perform that surgery.
Exactly. Abraham didn't have a lab. He didn't know about coagulation factors, but the instruction was biologically perfect.
And then you have the hygiene laws in Leviticus. Hand washing, quarantine.
We take these for granted because of germ theory. But for most of history, doctors didn't wash their hands. Yet, 3,000 years prior, the Mosaic Law mandated running water for cleansing after touching a dead body. It mandated quarantine. These laws protected Israel from the plagues that devastated other nations.
They were doing it for ritual purity, but they were getting biological protection.
It implies a knowledge base that exceeded the cultural understanding of the time.
There's also that story about Matthew Morey. I love this one. He's the father of oceanography, right?
He is. The story goes he was sick in bed and his son was reading him Psalm 8, which mentions the paths of the seas. Morey stopped him and said, "If God says there are paths in the seas, I am going to find them."
And he did.
He dedicated his life to mapping ocean currents and wind circuits.
Mm-hmm.
He literally discovered ocean currents because he trusted a poetic line in the Psalms.
And then there's the big one, cosmology. The ancient world had some creative ideas about what held the Earth up.
Oh yeah. Turtles, elephants, Atlas. The myths always have the Earth resting on something. But in the book of Job, probably the oldest book in the Bible, it says in chapter 26, he stretches out the north over the empty place and hangs the earth upon nothing.
Hangs the Earth upon nothing. That is exactly what it does. It's floating in space.
It's a description of gravity and suspension in space that contradicts every other ancient cosmology. How did the writer of Job know that?
That is the question. And it leads us to the category of evidence that I think is the most mind-bending of all. Prophecy.
Right, because telling the future with 100% accuracy is supposed to be impossible. But the Bible stakes its reputation on it. And we aren't talking about vague horoscopes.
No, we're talking about specific geopolitical events. Like the city of Tyre. This one is so specific, it's eerie. Ezekiel prophesies that Tyre will be destroyed,
Yeah.
but he gives these weirdly specific details. The stones, the timber, and the dust will be thrown into the middle of the water.
And that the site will become a bare rock, a place for spreading nets. At the time, Tyre was a powerful fortress, part on the mainland, part on an island. Nebuchadnezzar came and destroyed the mainland city, but the island fortress was untouchable. So it seemed like the prophecy had only half happened.
But then centuries later, here comes Alexander the Great.
Alexander wants to take the island. He doesn't have a strong enough navy, so what does he do? He takes the rubble from the old mainland city, the stones, the timber, the very dust, and scrapes it all up to build a massive causeway out to the island.
He literally threw the city into the sea.
Scrape the land clean, down to the bare rock, just as Ezekiel said. Today, fishermen dry their nets on those rocks. Alexander the Great, a Greek king, fulfilled a Hebrew prophecy from centuries before he was born, just by using military engineering.
That level of detail is hard to explain away, but the stakes get even higher with the Messiah. The sheer number of prophecies about one person.
It's the statistical impossibility that stands out. You have prophecies written over 1,000 years by different authors, all converging on one man. Micah 5.2 says he must be born in Bethlehem. That's 700 years before Jesus.
Zechariah says he'll enter Jerusalem on a donkey.
Psalm 22 describes a form of execution piercing hands and feet, a millennium before crucifixion was even invented by the Persians.
So the psalmist described a death that didn't even legally exist yet.
Exactly. And Isaiah 53 says he would be buried with the rich, which happened when Joseph of Arimathea offered his tomb. Then there's Daniel 9, the prophecy of the 70 weeks. It's a mathematical timeline that pinpoints the exact timing of Jesus' ministry.
You know, some people say, well, maybe Jesus just read the Old Testament and tried to act it out. You know, okay, I need a donkey.
You can arrange to ride a donkey. You cannot arrange where you are born. You can't arrange for soldiers to gamble for your clothes while you're dying. You cannot arrange the rise and fall of empires to set the stage for your arrival. These events were completely outside of his human control.
Speaking of empires, we have to talk about the Persian shift. This was the one part of the research that made me stop and just say, whoa, because it connects the ancient text to what I see on the news every single night.
This is a profound example of prophecy unfolding in real time. For most of biblical history, Persia, modern-day Iran, was actually a friend to Israel.
Right, King Cyrus. The Cyrus cylinder confirms it. He was the one who told the Jews, go home, rebuild your temple. He paid for it.
Persia was the benefactor. Later you have the story of Esther. Even in modern history, until 1979, Iran and Israel were allies.
So for 2,500 years, you'd read the Bible and think, okay, Persia's the good guy. But then you read Ezekiel 38.
And Ezekiel 38 describes a massive coalition of nations that will attack Israel in the latter years. And right at the top of the list is Persia. For centuries, scholars must have just scratched their heads. Why would Persia, the ally, be the enemy? It made no geopolitical sense.
Until 1979, the Islamic Revolution.
Overnight, Persia became Iran. And it shifted from an ally to an archenemy. Today, Iran is the primary sponsor of proxies attacking Israel. They openly call for its destruction. The geopolitical reality has aligned perfectly with a prophecy that seemed impossible for 25 centuries.
It's the aha moment. The pieces of the puzzle just snapped together. It wasn't wrong. It was just waiting for the right time.
It creates a tremendous amount of confidence. We aren't looking at a book that guesses. We're looking at a book that knows.
So when we zoom out and look at the whole picture, what do we have?
We have a convergence. You have archaeology confirming the history, the kings, the governors, the battles. You have the scrolls confirming that the text hasn't changed. You have medical and scientific insights that predate human discovery. And you have prophecy that maps out history with impossible precision.
It's not a leap of faith into the dark. It feels more like stepping onto a bridge that's been engineered to hold weight.
Exactly. The evidence proves that the Bible stands firm. Critics rise and fall. Empires rise and fall. Arguments come and go. But the text remains. It has been tested, and it keeps proving itself to be accurate.
It really makes you think. If the Bible has been proven right about the past, about the kings, the wars, the science, and if it's been right about the prophecies we've seen fulfilled so far,
then the logical question follows.
Right. What does that imply about the prophecies regarding the future that haven't happened yet? If the track record is 100% so far, we probably need to pay very close attention to the rest of the book.
I would say that is the most rational conclusion one could make.
That is something worth chewing on. Thank you for walking us through this. It's been an absolute journey.
My pleasure. It's always fascinating to see the evidence speak for itself.
And to you listening, thanks for joining us. Keep asking questions, keep digging. We'll see you next time.